Most people think the Victorian era was defined by prudish morality, but the Crown's greatest achievement wasn't an empire. It was a public relations campaign, so effective it obscured the personality of the Queen's most rebellious child. We see the iconic Stoic portraits. Queen Victoria surrounded by her 9 children, a mountain of velvet, lace, and unquestionable order. This was the birth of the royal family brand, a carefully manicured image of domestic bliss designed to stabilize a changing world. Victoria's success in marketing this moral perfection was unparalleled. But then, the pristine surface began to crack under the weight of a secret too volatile to be spoken aloud. Scholars scouring the royal diaries noticed chilling gaps, specific, surgical redactions surrounding the 4th daughter, Princess Louise. While her siblings were catalogued with obsessive detail, Louise's presence feels like a ghost flickering in the margins of history. Imagine the royal family posing for a daguerreotype, their expressions frozen in regal dignity, while standing atop a foundation of sealed secrets. Beneath their feet lie miles of archives and destroyed correspondence that dared to tell a different story. Louise was the Crown's inherent contradiction, a modern woman trapped in a traditional institution. She was an artist and a bohemian soul who challenged the architecture of her mother's monarchy. Her life wasn't just forgotten. It was systematically obscured by the palace machine. To preserve the myth of the grandmother of Europe, the daughter who refused to follow the script had to be managed. But as the smoke from the palace fireplaces cleared, one question remained. What exactly was so dangerous about Louise that the Queen viewed her not merely as a daughter, but as a liability that needed to be contained? The answer lay not in her rebellious acts, but deep within the clinical gaze of the Queen herself. Most people think the Victorian era was defined by the warmth of a sprawling family gathered around a Christmas tree, the very archetype of domestic bliss. We are told royalty is divinely chosen, but biology does not respect crowns. The Queen lived in fear that the struggles of her grandfather, George III, would resurface in her children. Following the death of Prince Albert, Victoria transformed from a grieving widow into a vigilant observer of her own offspring. She viewed her children not just as individuals, but as stewards of a fragile legacy. Every spark of independence was scrutinized. Every temperamental moment was analyzed for potential instability. For a time, the brand of the royal family succeeded globally, painting a portrait of stability. But inside the private apartments, the Queen performed a silent, critical analysis of her 4th daughter, Louise. Consider the juxtaposition. The baptismal font, intended to bless a princess, stood in a room where she was subjected to unrelenting scrutiny. Louise was no longer just a child. She was a variable to be managed. She refused to adhere to the rigid, suffocating mourning protocols that had overtaken the palace. While Victoria draped the world in black crepe, Louise hungered for color. This was the birth of the problem child, a free spirit who saw the restrictions behind her mother's mourning veil. To Victoria, Louise's vitality was viewed as a hereditary instability, a perceived echo of the past disguised as artistic temperament. The mother-daughter dynamic became a quiet war. Victoria treated Louise's natural curiosity as a moral weakness that required strict oversight. The princess was monitored, her letters scrutinized, her spirit treated like a risk to the legacy of Prince Albert. In this cold atmosphere, Louise realized that the only way to survive was to find a sanctuary where the Queen's eyes could not reach, a place where the rigid rules of the court were replaced by the creative freedom of the studio. But a new influence was already beginning to stretch across the palace floors. Most people think Princess Louise was merely a bored socialite dabbling in watercolors. They view her as a dutiful daughter, finding a harmless hobby. But the truth is that Louise's artistry was a calculated act of independence that challenged the foundations of the Windsor legacy. She sought to strip away the suffocating layers of royal protocol, yearning for a life defined by creation rather than birthright. She found genuine success as the most talented of Victoria's children, earning a prestigious place at the National Art Training School. But then, this artistic liberation caused tension within the palace walls as her immersion into the Kensington art world began to erode the boundary between the sovereign and the subject. In Kensington, Louise encountered Joseph Edgar Bohm. He was a sculptor of immense talent, but to the court, he was a commoner. The juxtaposition was jarring. Picture a royal princess draped in silk, stepping into a studio filled with wet clay and plaster. Here, she was not treated as Her Royal Highness. She was a student, her hands working the same earth as the artisans. This blurred line between the throne and the studio was a violation of Victorian class boundaries. Rumors began to circulate. Historians have long speculated that her relationship with Bohm crossed the line from professional mentorship to personal intimacy. In the quiet of the studio, the princess sought a connection the palace could not provide. The monarchy had marketed itself on the concept of middle-class respectability. If a daughter of the empire was found to be entangled with a sculptor, the curated image would be at risk. The tension in the court was palpable. Every time Louise returned to the palace, she brought the atmosphere of the bohemian world with her. She was no longer just a problem child. She was a potential scandal. As the rumors of her associations grew, a new complication emerged, one that could not be solved by a simple lecture. Just as the Queen prepared to restrict her daughter's artistic excursions, Louise's health took a sudden, unexplained turn, leading to a series of medical withdrawals that hinted at a secret shrouded in total silence. Most people think Queen Victoria's reign was defined by static, eternal mourning, yet the archives suggest a determined matriarch willing to go to extreme lengths to protect the institution. The facade of the Widow of Windsor masked a household governed by precision and control. Princess Louise was a central figure in this domestic theater, her artistic flair initially praised as a bridge to the public. But that creative spark began to look like a risk to the monarchy's reputation. The year 1867 serves as a void in the royal itinerary. While the public was told of a princess suffering from vague malaise, the secret ledgers of the palace suggest a more frantic reality. As Louise was withdrawn from public view, the atmosphere in the palace grew tense. History looks at the calendar and sees a young woman recovering from illness. Skeptics look at the timeline and see dates that align with a concealed pregnancy. This is where the Locock theory emerges. Sir Charles Locock was the Queen's own physician, the keeper of royal secrets. In the same window that Louise vanished from view, a child appeared in the household of Locock's son, Henry. The boy possessed no formal birth certificate, a significant oversight, and was rumored to have been visited by members of the royal household. The medicalization of Louise's situation became a tool of erasure. She was no longer a daughter to be comforted, but a liability to be quarantined. The juxtaposition is striking. On the state floor, Victoria stands in perpetual black silk, a monument to moral rectitude. Yet, beneath those floorboards, courtiers and physicians managed a crisis with discretion. To the world, the Queen was a grieving mother. To Louise, she was an overseer presiding over a systematic removal of her agency. The Crown chose to treat the potential scandal as a threat to be neutralized rather than a life to be acknowledged. This was the reality of the Victorian machine. Perfection was mandatory. Louise's autonomy was restricted, replaced by a regimen of isolation. She was the modern woman being rewritten as an invalid to save a legacy. But as the whispers grew, The Queen realized mere isolation would not suffice. A more permanent, legal solution was required to bind Louise to the throne forever. Most people think a royal wedding is the ultimate coronation of a woman's worth. But for Princess Louise, her 1871 union with John Campbell, the Marquis of Lorne, was less of a romance and more of a strategic containment measure. It was the elegant deployment of a solution designed to neutralize a royal rebel who had become too visible. Victoria needed a path for the daughter who breathed too much life into the corridors of Windsor. Lorne was the answer, a man of noble birth, but lacking the royal blood that might have given Louise more leverage. Historians have long discussed the true nature of this arrangement. Behind the pageantry lay a complex truth. Lorne's personal interests were rumored to lie elsewhere, and the marriage remained childless. It was a union of convenience for the crown, providing the appearance of stability, while ensuring no rival heirs would complicate the succession. When the rumors of Louise's past refused to fade, the crown enacted a permanent solution. In 1878, Lorne was appointed Governor-General of Canada. It was framed as a promotion, but in reality, it served as a transatlantic exile. The problem was being moved thousands of miles away. For a brief window, the Canadian public saw a revitalized princess, a woman who braved the frontier and championed the arts. She appeared to be the perfect symbol of British stability. But then, the doors of Rideau Hall closed, and the isolation began to weigh on her. Imagine the visual. The external splendor of the vice-regal court, where Louise presided over banquets, contrasted with the silence of her private quarters. She lived a life of profound separation, often occupying entirely separate wings from her husband. The woman who once sculpted figures out of raw clay was now being molded by the institution, her voice a mere echo of the Queen's directives. Louise realized that her primary function was to maintain the image of the empire. She was a living advertisement for a domestic bliss that did not exist. Every letter home was carefully composed. Every public appearance was a mask. She was being erased in real time, her complex humanity replaced by an icon of duty. As Victoria's health began to fail, a new threat emerged. Louise's secrets weren't just hers anymore. They were a liability that her brother, the future king, was already preparing to erase. Most people think history is an objective record of events. But for Princess Louise, the record was a tool turned against her. The tragedy isn't that she didn't exist, but that her voice was deliberately silenced by her family. When Victoria passed in 1901, the monarchy appeared triumphant. But then, the campaign of silence began. King Edward VII and Henry Ponsonby did not just mourn, they mobilized. They viewed Louise's unconventional spirit not as a legacy, but as a vulnerability to the crown's dignity. In the halls of Windsor, the fireplaces were utilized for destruction. Thousands of intimate letters, detailing her art and her defiance, were fed into the flames. We see the stark juxtaposition, the gilded mantelpiece framing the incineration of a life's complexity. Stationery turned to ash, drifting into the London night. To preserve the brand, they sanitized the archive. Today, the Royal Archives at Windsor remain a fortress. There are boxes that cannot be opened and folders that do not officially exist. The full truth of Louise's life remains one of the monarchy's most guarded secrets. Yet, even the most thorough fire leaves behind a residue, and the silence itself tells a story.